Last weekend, Ukraine launched an unprecedented drone attack against 4 Russian air bases, destroying an as-yet unconfirmed number of long-range, nuclear-capable strategic bombers and exceedingly rare airborne early warning and control aircraft. Now, drones have been a continuous presence in the airspace above this conflict, well, since Russia invaded more than 3 years ago now. But this attack was different. With just 117 small armed quadcopters, not just destroying billions of dollars worth of aircraft, but causing what may well be permanent damage to Russia's air power apparatus, as most of the bombers and early warning aircraft destroyed have been out of production for decades, and as such, could not be rebuilt. Now, there's no denying that this operation was an immense success for Ukraine, but for many observers in the West, the news of this mission might be considered, well, bittersweet. Because for all the technological training and economic differences between Russian forces today and those in the United States or elsewhere in NATO, this past week has forced just about every military power on the planet to step back and wonder if they could defend against such an attack if one were to target them. And the answer to that question, by and large, is no. So let's talk about what would happen if the US were to be targeted in this sort of drone attack, how it might play out, how the US might defend against it, and most important of all, why drone defense for the mainland just isn't Uncle Sam's top priority right now. I'm Alex Hollings, and this is Air Power. Before we dive in, here's a quick word from our sponsor, T-Mobile.
Those who serve save with T-Mobile. Get 4 lines of unlimited for $25 per month. And you get it all on America's largest and fastest 5G network. Visit our website to see how military families save with T-Mobile.
Over the past few years, there have been times where some might argue that I've been a bit dismissive of the threat posed by artificial intelligence-enabled drone swarms on the modern battlefield. So I thought it might be best to clarify my position on these systems right up front. There is absolutely no denying that drones and artificial intelligence of one sort or another play a significant and rapidly growing role in 21st century warfare. At their most basic levels, these systems are low-cost, high-impact battlefield assets that can easily overwhelm air defenses designed to bring down larger, lower-volume targets like fighter jets or inbound missiles. Advanced autonomy can allow drone swarms to distribute targets for maximum effect, while closing in simultaneously to maximize the number of drones that are able to reach their targets. And with price tags that generally float around the tens of thousands of dollars, they represent a huge battlefield bargain over high-end cruise or ballistic missiles that might cost millions of dollars a shot. And it's because of these and similar very real benefits that many in the media have come to characterize drones as something of a bargain bin superweapon from which there is just no escape, as though these pint-sized quadcopters are the Sharknado of warfare, just popping up wherever the plot dictates, logic be damned. But as we so often discuss on this channel, reality is a lot more nuanced than hyperbolic headlines and sensational content creators would have you believe. And actually understanding this threat and how to mitigate it requires that we look at these drones for what they really are, including their unique capabilities, but also their inherent limitations. Now, based on photographic evidence released by the Ukrainian FSB, or their domestic security service that carried out this attack, we can see that the drones employed in the strikes on Russian air bases were small quadcopters that would probably fall within Group 1 of the American Defense Department's drone classification table. Now, that's a complicated way of saying that they're pretty small drones, capable of carrying payloads of maybe 20 pounds, but probably less, and covering ranges of almost certainly under 30 nautical miles, which is around 35 regular miles for those of us who aren't pirates. And these drones tend to struggle to fly at altitudes of more than just a few thousand feet. Now, these limitations are created by the drone's size, power supply, and method of propulsion. So if you wanted to carry a larger payload or cover more distance, you'd need a larger drone. Something from Group 2, for instance, can often carry payloads as big as 55 pounds to targets twice as far away or maybe over 60 miles out. And if you wanted to cover some real distance with a more serious payload, well, then you'd move up to Group 3, where you'd find mainstays of modern conflicts in both Ukraine and the Middle East, like Iran's Shahed 136, which can reportedly carry a 110-pound warhead to targets as far out as 1,600 miles away. But this is where the media's love affair with buzzwords can do us a bit of a disservice, because an armed Group 3 one-way attack drone like the Shahed 136 also meets the criteria for most definitions of a good old-fashioned cruise missile. Just a really cheap one that, because of its low cost, doesn't perform as well as most other cruise missiles would. And while the Shahed 136 doesn't really use AI in any meaningful ways, many modern cruise missiles actually do, like the AGM-158C long-range anti-ship missile, which uses onboard artificial intelligence to identify enemy ships before distributing those targets within a pack of nearby weapons and finally choosing the most vulnerable impact point on a warship's hull. And if you ask me, that is a much scarier weapon system in every sense of the phrase. But people will call a group of LRASMs a pack of cruise missiles, and they'll call a group of Shahed 136s a drone swarm. You know, because, well, that just sounds a lot scarier. In other words, we should be mindful of the hype that's forcefully injected into the terms that we use to describe these weapons, because most people don't have the time to parse through the semantics of weapon classifications and are instead pretty easily convinced that Russia really is lobbing hypersonic missiles into Ukraine, where Kinzhal is, of course, actually an air-launched ballistic missile that they just called a hypersonic missile, or that Ukraine is blocking out the sun with swarms of roving quadcopters attacking Russian air bases like a hive mind. Okay, so we should all understand now that drones are not super weapons, but are instead just generally inexpensive ways to deliver a payload to a target. And because of that low cost, they can often be fielded in large enough numbers to overwhelm legacy air defenses that were designed to mitigate very different types of threats. Now, this, of course, does not mean that drone swarms, like the ones employed by Ukraine to take out these Russian bombers, aren't a very serious and even downright scary problem. But once we remove all the hype, we're finally able to engage with the topic for what it really is, rather than what we're scared it could be. And delving a bit deeper into Operation Spiderweb, which is what Ukraine called their drone attack, can provide us with a bit more context to base our defensive strategy on. According to statements made by Ukrainian officials and reported by the New York Times, Ukraine pulled off this incredible offensive by slowly smuggling 117 explosive-laden quadcopters across the border into Russia, which were then hidden away inside wooden containers with remote-controlled lids. Those containers were then loaded onto trailers, and local Russian truck drivers who had seemingly no knowledge of the attack were hired to deliver the trailers to within striking distance of 4 airfields deep inside Russia. Now, Ukrainian sources have confirmed that these trailers were each parked within just 4 or so miles of their targets, and that is an important detail here to note. These Group 1 quadcopters just don't have enough range to engage distant targets on their own and need to be launched in pretty close proximity in order to be effective. Now, subsequent statements out of Ukraine muddy the AI waters a bit from there because the Security Service of Ukraine, also known as the SBU, released a statement saying the drones used, quote, autonomous artificial intelligence algorithms and manual operator intervention to complete this mission, before going on to say that some drones lost signal and switched to performing a mission using artificial intelligence along a pre-planned route. And whether you want to call that AI is up to you. Now, those drones then closed with a number of aircraft, often pausing while hovering above them to either identify specific target points or to wait for operator instructions relayed from Ukraine before descending and detonating their onboard payloads in very intentional places on these aircraft to maximize the impact of their explosives, ripping through literally billions of dollars worth of large aircraft with seemingly no attempted intercept or intervention of any kind from Russian forces, probably because they just didn't think Ukrainian weapons could reach targets so far from the front lines. Now, this daring operation is now, well, a case study in the threats posed by quadcopter swarms to undefended bases, but it's also, well, a pretty good representation of why the war in Ukraine has lent itself to such widespread and effective use of small drones. Because they share a border. Mounting this offensive was a matter of smuggling quadcopters, mechanized sheds, command and control relays, and of course, explosives across the more than 1,200 miles or so of shared land border between these two nations, where they could then be loaded onto trailers and delivered to their target locations. Now, assuming each of these 117 drones carried an explosive payload of maybe 10 pounds, but certainly a maximum of 20 pounds, this importantly means smuggling anywhere from 1,170 pounds to 2,340 pounds of high explosives alone into Russia through that border. Now, we'll use composition C4 explosives for our estimate, which has a pretty generally understood volume of around 26.4 cubic inches per pound. At 1,170 pounds, that shakes out to roughly 30,888 cubic inches of C4. Now, there are 1,728 cubic inches in a cubic foot, so that shakes out to around 17.9 cubic feet of high explosives. And at a 20-pound payload per drone, we'd be looking at 35.7 cubic feet of explosives alone to be smuggled across that border. Now, incredible as this feat truly was, it was feasible in the first place for the same reason these small Group 1 FPV drones have become a mainstay of this fight: proximity. Due to their limited range, these small drones have to be deployed at relatively close range. And because Russia and Ukraine currently are at war, the border between them is a lot more porous than you might expect between other developed nations. If a well-equipped adversary were to try to carry out a similar drone attack on US installations on the mainland of this country, they would likely find it pretty difficult to smuggle what was probably multiple tractor-trailers worth of drones, equipment, and, again, explosives across the Rio Grande. Now, I'm not saying it would be impossible, but the logistics, the command and control, and the sheer volume of hardware being smuggled into the US would make such an attack, well, an immense undertaking. Objectively speaking, we're talking exponentially more difficult than Ukraine's pretty impressive attack on Russia. But that obviously isn't the only way a drone attack like this might play out, and in the United States, the easiest way to conduct this sort of an attack would be to deploy your drone swarms from shipping containers moored in American ports. But this also wouldn't really be optimal for several reasons. Ukraine positioned its drones within just 4 miles of their targets, and the drones attacking the United States would similarly be limited to only engaging targets within relative close proximity to their launching ports. American bombers are regularly located all over the world, but tend to be stationed in places like Minot Air Force Base in North Dakota, Whiteman Air Force Base in Missouri, and Ellsworth Air Force Base in South Dakota, putting a large portion of American bombers way outside the reach of such an attack. But, logically speaking, an attack launched from shipping containers in American ports would likely involve both armed drones and, just as importantly, much longer-ranged cruise missiles, like Russia's Club K shipping container-based cruise missile system, capable of striking targets nearly 190 miles inland. And rather than attacking aircraft, such an attack would almost certainly prioritize vital infrastructure, like the American electrical grid, creating panic within the United States and, to at least some extent, hindering America's ability to mount a response. But what if someone did manage to smuggle all the drones, command and control equipment, and of course, explosives into the United States to carry out a similar attack on American military installations or, again, that vital infrastructure? Well, in that unlikely but still possible scenario, we can say with some certainty that the United States does have the technology to stop such an attack in its tracks. But it almost certainly doesn't have it deployed in sufficient volume or in the necessary places to actually stop the attack at all. The United States has a significant portfolio of counter-drone systems, ranging from passive to kinetic. Systems like Mjolnir, developed by the Air Force Research Lab and based on the Tactical High-Power Operational Responder, or THOR, technology demonstrator built by Leidos. This system uses high-powered microwaves to zap entire drone swarms out of the air. Then there are systems like the Teledyne Cerberus XL, which uses thermal imaging, 3D radar, and RF detection to identify and target as many as 500 drones at a time to relay that target data to a long list of interceptors. Northrop Grumman has massive 30mm guns with airburst rounds tied to radar and electro-optical targeting systems to bring down drones in rapid succession. Anduril's Anvil system uses armed quadcopters to chase down and destroy inbound drones, and the list genuinely just goes on and on. Last June, the U.S. Army's Joint Counter Small Unmanned Systems Office tested 9 different counter-drone systems against swarms of up to 40 drones at a time, which is more than any individual Russian airfield saw in last weekend's attack. And they reported very successful results, but no details have been released. To put it plainly, the systems necessary to bring down drone threats do exist, but to date, they have not been built or fielded in sufficient numbers to be deployed on all of America's nearly 500 domestic military installations, let alone the hundreds more located overseas that are genuinely a higher priority. And this is an element of defense that's often glossed over when discussing these kinds of possibilities, because people tend to think having a technology and deploying a technology go hand in hand. But the reality of managing budgets, production, logistics, training, and operation means, well, hardware is rarely, if ever, deployed without a pressing reason. And in this case, there just happens to be a more pressing concern. And that is the likelihood of an attack on the American mainland that comes in the form of submarine-launched, long-range, conventionally armed cruise missiles, which both Russia and China already have in service and could deploy against the United States with significantly less effort, cost, or risk, and ultimately accomplish similar ends. Now, Russian attack submarines, for instance, are known to operate in American Atlantic coastal waters, and they are armed with 3 M14 caliber cruise missiles capable of striking targets more than 1,200 miles away, with warheads as large as 1,100 pounds, all at supersonic speeds. Now, Russia currently operates a reported 11 nuclear-powered attack submarines, each armed with between 4 and 8 of these long-range cruise missiles, depending on which source you trust. China's submarine fleet is a lot less advanced and capable, but as we've discussed in a recent video, they are working tirelessly to close that gap. China's improved Type 093 attack submarines, of which only a few are in service quite yet, and their forthcoming Type 095 attack submarines are both designed to carry YJ-18 anti-ship cruise missiles and are now being modified to carry CJ-10 land attack cruise missiles with similar range and payload capabilities to Russia's Caliber line. Now, the United States is actively developing ways to counter these sorts of attacks, including using F-117 Nighthawks to serve as low-signature stand-ins for these cruise missiles, allowing Air National Guard F-15s the chance to practice intercepting these weapons before they reach their targets. But make no mistake about it, a large-scale attack of this sort would all but certainly succeed in causing serious problems for the United States. While it may not be exactly easy to launch conventional attacks on U.S. infrastructure from offshore submarines, it would be much easier than smuggling tractor-trailer loads of drones and explosives across the American border while you wait to coordinate your strikes. Now, let me be clear. The threats posed to American military installations and critical infrastructure by drone swarms are very real. But the harsh reality of the matter is that they aren't the most pressing threats facing the mainland United States today. Fielding effective defenses against these sorts of attacks is absolutely critical. And I mean right now, not on some future date. But the most critical places in need of these defenses aren't stateside. Drones are not magic. They're cheap pieces of hardware that are limited by the very thing that makes them special: their low cost and ease of production. As anti-drone defenses not only improve but become more ubiquitous, some drones will be less effective, while others adapt to overcome new challenges. Drones will become larger to carry more fuel or battery power. They'll carry more advanced onboard computers to discern between targets, and they'll coordinate more effectively with one another. They'll adopt new methods of propulsion to achieve higher speeds, and new external designs to improve aerodynamics and limit their radar detectability. And once you've packed all that technology into your kamikaze drones to make them truly general-purpose battlefield assets, well, they aren't cheap anymore. Congratulations, you just invented cruise missiles again. But one more time. I am not saying that small, low-cost quadcopter drone swarms can't be incredibly useful or really, really scary on the battlefield. I'm just saying that drones are just the latest in a long line of new technologies that are very disruptive as they emerge, but eventually see their utility limited to specific operations through improving technologies, tactics, and hardware. But just between you and me, I will still be keeping my eyes on the sky just in case. And with that ends yet another edition of Air Power from Sandboxx News. I'm Alex Hollings. Make sure to swing by sandboxnews.com today and every day for all the latest in news, entertainment, and now merch from all around the force. If you got anything out of today's video, make sure to click like and subscribe down below and leave me a comment so I know what I should cover next. And of course, don't forget to tap on that bell icon so you never miss a drop from Sandboxx News.